Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.
Hello again, everyone. Thanks for joining us for two special editions back-to-back of Arkansas Week. Perhaps you have heard there is a race for Congress in Arkansas's 2nd Congressional District. Both candidates in alphabetical order. And we begin, of course, with State Senator Joyce Elliott, Democrat of Little Rock, the Democratic congressional nominee. Senator, thanks very much for making yourself available for the broadcast.
I'm happy to, Steve, and thanks for having me.
Well, let me start with kind of a breaking story, or a story that's in flux, and it involves the institution that you seek to join, the U.S. House. The Speaker is holding out for a larger stimulus package than apparently the Senate is prepared to accept. Sort of kept in flux by that is on additional federal unemployment assistance, aid to cities, and some other things. If you were in the House, would you urge the Speaker to take what she can now and come back for more later?
Well, I'm hesitant to have such an ironclad response because I am not there in all the particulars. But what I do absolutely know, they need to figure out a way to come to an agreement. And I know there are some nuances that have happened in this whole process, because for months there's been something on the table from the House for the Senate to consider. And just now, I think about a week ago, is the Senate even beginning to think about that? So we've been waiting for a long time to get relief for folks who've been hurting out there. We could have already have negotiated a deal, in the legislature by now. I think if people were working together. But I don't care who it is, if it's Nancy Pelosi or if it's McConnell. We need to get something, though, on the table that's going to help people now. But let us not forget, help people now and will help them in the long run. Because if there's not something in that package to help people in the long run, or some understanding that there is a long run to this whole situation, folks are going to be in the same or worse off, a month or two from now. So we can't keep acting as if the pandemic is going to cooperate with us. So rather than just saying, we're going to have a response, for people who are trying to live from paycheck to paycheck, and it's going to be in some response is going to be in effect until this date. We ought to be thinking about this in terms of targets. We are going to have relief for people until the pandemic is in this shape or whatever. I think we really need to think about it in that way, rather otherwise, I think we're just reaching for bright, shiny objects to make people feel better right now. Well, I think everybody there, I think, needs to be more responsible in the way we're thinking about this.
But would you accept half a loaf now? I think a former Democratic president from Arkansas said, "Never let the perfect be the enemy of the good." Is that what is happening now in Washington, in your estimation?
Well, it's really easy to accept half a loaf, to get relief now, and that's important. But what I do think we have to be careful about, and this is a hard thing about trying to use a collaborative process to get the best for everybody. You can accept half a loaf now and get something for people, or you can really sit down and put your shoulders to the wheel and get a solution for a problem that's going to be more long term. So if I end up and I have no other choice after we've gone through a hard-fought collaborative process, which this has not happened. Yes, something is better than nothing, but our people are better than this. They need more than folks in Washington just settling for something right now, because we are third in the last two relief and getting that relief for workers, and so I really do call on people, if it has to be this way, that it's going to be something or nothing. But I think that is not the most responsible thing to do. If that's all we can get, that's all we can get. But first, you need to fight like crazy to make sure we are not pushed into this false choice of getting something now rather than getting a long-term response. So if I didn't have any other choice, of course, we don't want to just leave people hanging. But I don't want to lose this notion that we really are pushing folks into a false choice rather than working for a solution that's more long-term.
Moving on, but staying in the fiscal. Let's assume for a second that you are elected in November and that Mr. Biden is elected in November. He's proposing a revenue package, a tax package that would raise, he says, income taxes, raise marginal rates on those earning $400,000 or better, also making significant changes, raising the corporate tax code, altering the treatment on capital gains. Is that acceptable? Is that wise? Could you support that?
I think it is something definitely worth a discussion, but I would just have to be there in the totality of this whole package that he's talking about. But I will remind you that when the corporate tax was lowered, even the folks who were in the corporate world, and even the Secretary of Commerce, I think at that time it was saying we didn't have to lower the taxes on the corporate side as much as we did, and that it was not even a good idea. But I do think, Steve, we need to make sure we remember what this 2017 tax break was about. It was an absolute giveaway to the ultra rich. 1% of the folks got 83% of the benefits. So I think what Joe Biden is taking a look at, and what I would want to take a look at, is if we are going to try to create a more fair tax structure, because that's what we need to do. There was no reason for the 1% to get 83% of the benefits with the tax breaks that we did in 2017. And the other thing that was really important was there was not any kind of there was not any kind of crisis that demanded that we do a tax cut in 2017. It's one of the few times in the history of our country that out of nowhere we just created a tax break that did not benefit most of the people in this country, but a tax break just to benefit those that are the richest. And remember when our president went to Mar-a-Lago, and the first thing he announced to the folks there, I just made you all, everybody here, a whole lot richer. There was no crisis. And then we created this big hole, we just grew our debt by trillions of dollars. And that is something we need to talk about and use that money for the things that we need to the most, starting with building back our economy and infrastructure after this COVID-19 crisis that we are in.
Well, interest rates are low right now, so the federal government can get away with printing a lot of money right now. Sooner or later, there will be an end, we assume, to the COVID crisis. Now, both parties agree that a great deal of stimulus has been necessary, but now there is some resistance to raising the debt, and the debt, which you acknowledge everyone acknowledges has just skyrocketed in the last 18 months. What do you see as a long-term solution? Well, sooner or later, interest rates have to go back up.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I think we have to accept the fact that this bigger hole that we created with debt, with the tax giveaway to the richest, we're going to have to rethink that. But the major thing, if we rethink that and use those same funds or even more funds to rebuild our infrastructure, something we've been talking about, Steve, for years, and something that was, like I won't say an absolute wonderful response after the Depression, but we've been here before where we had to spend a lot of money to build back. And we're at that point again. We know how to do it. If we rebuild our infrastructure, that will put millions of people back to work. And if we rebuild our infrastructure now and include the broadband that we need for improving our schools, to make it possible for the economy to grow in our rural areas, to make it possible for entrepreneurs out in rural areas to be able to have a good living, this is how we can come back. And when we have jobs, when people have great jobs, they're paying taxes in, but they're not paying an exorbitant amount of their taxes in. We are not still doing a giveaway to the richest people there are. We can get out of the debt, but we can't if we just keep engaging in foolish policies and keep trying to convince people that tax breaks will lead to job creation. That's not the case. I've had at least two people I know who are rich people who got the tax break and who are just gobsmacked that they got a tax break like this, because I'm not creating jobs. I'm just going to invest it or save it. That's what they're doing. So getting our policy right, I think, is the best thing we can do, because that's sustainable. When we get our policy right, get people back to work, rebuild our country, and it's a win-win situation.
Well, let me, particularly as it involves the corporate tax rate, Senator, the argument from the opposite side is, and from some economists, is that you raise the corporate tax rate, you run the risk of driving some capital overseas, investment overseas, and that it will inevitably take at least some toll on working class Americans owing to a lack of investment. Your response?
Well, that's right. Yeah, that's right. But that is why the corporate tax rate was lowered. And the only problem with it, the folks who were the benefit of that tax break said it didn't need to be lowered as much as it was. And I don't know if we're going to do anything else with it now. I don't know if that's going to be the case, because once the giveaway is done, it's hard to take it back. But I remind us that's no longer an issue, because when it was lowered as low as it is now, even the people the secretaries in the administration said it didn't need to be lowered that much. Even some of the largest companies in the country said it did not need to be lowered that much. It needed to be. I'm glad it was, because there's no question that it was having some impact on whether or not people remained here at home or whether or not they sought refuge overseas. It needed to be lowered. It just didn't have to be as much as it was.
Moving on, Senator, the environment and climate. Mr. Biden says the Green Deal, the new Green Deal as proposed, goes too far. A, do you agree? What would be an acceptable environmental plan to you in terms of government action? And C, the phase out of fossil fuels, which has got a lot of Arkansans, raised a lot of eyebrows across the country, especially in farm country where they burn an awful lot of diesel. What is your thought?
Well, first, when people talk about the Green New Deal, that's not something that I can say I support, because it's more framework than it is anything else. But I absolutely do have my ideas about what I think should happen, because this is a real problem. There's no question we need to focus on green jobs. Here we are after with all that's happened, in the crisis of the pandemic. We're going to have to rebuild our economy. And so many times out of a crisis, you get an opportunity, and this is one of them. So we ought to have a focus on building back with green jobs. There are people who have jobs that are dependent on fossil fuels. We have to be thoughtful and empathetic about what happens to them, Steve. We cannot just be flippant and just say to people, for example, your job is not going to be here anymore, so just get ready for change. We have to have a transition for folks who are in those kind of jobs, to make sure they're prepared for and ready for, respect what they need to be able to make that transition, so that we don't act as if they don't have families to support. We don't act as if they don't depend on those jobs. We have to have balance in the process, but it is something we absolutely must do to make sure we transfer from the fossil fuel jobs to the green jobs, because that's what's happening. But don't leave people behind. I know people in Southwest Arkansas, where I grew up, and they've depended on these kind of jobs. This is not something new to me. There were people all around me when I grew up, and I worked in El Dorado for years. So these are not, when we talk about these jobs, this is not a foreign thing to me. And I know people who had good livings because of it. So I taught their kids, I know their families, and I am not flippant about saying this is the way to do it, but I am clear-eyed that we have to begin to focus on green jobs in the interest of climate change, and in the interest of our kids having a future where they can live and have a healthy life.
Would a carbon tax be one way to achieve that goal? How would you regard a carbon tax?
Well, I think it's something to consider, because one of the things I think we tend to do a little bit too much, rather than having a comprehensive plan, we should put all of the cards on the table, and rather than one thing at a time and not know how it is going to affect something else, you put all the cards on the table and all the ideas on the table, and not look for a silver bullet and decide what's the best comprehensive policy that's going to include all the needs and look at all the possible benefits from it. That's what I think. That's just one thing on the table that should be a part of the discussion.
A great deal of discussion of late, Senator, about the process involved as it's unfolded in choosing a new Supreme Court justice, which has given rise to a lot of discussion about expanding the Supreme Court. Now, Mr. Biden says, I think as of today, that he's going to appoint a study, or he would appoint some sort of study commission to consider the possibility. What are your thoughts on that? Should the court be expanded? Should that be considered?
Well, my thoughts on this, Steve, are that this is something I know that Republicans brought up as a matter of a distraction, I think, to be frank about it. But
well, that's been bipartisan, Senator. There's been a lot of discussion on both sides.
There has been, and I'm getting to that. And I also know that this is something that is not brand new, because through history, the court has been expanded and contracted throughout history. But I just have to confess, it's just not my big concern right now. If it comes up and I'm there, then I would deal with it. But I always want to remind us, it's just not the priority right here. But if I were going to say, anything about what's happening now, the court is virtually being packed with the way the Republicans are handling this process. So if I'm going to talk about a court packing, we need to talk about what we're doing right now, because we've gone, the Republicans laid aside all kind of norms to add one person to the court. And for years, I guess I don't want to go too far with this, but for a couple of years at least, the Republicans denied President Obama the opportunity to place any judges on the courts. And at the minute President Trump was there, the first thing they did was started putting folks on the court. If we're going to talk packing, that's already happening. So
a question, an issue that will linger well after this election, no matter how it goes, is whether the United States should rethink the Electoral College, perhaps abolish it. Your thoughts? Would you support that?
Well, I think it's something. I think it's something that is worth discussing. And I'm not prepared to say right at this point I would just abolish it, but it's something worth discussing because, when the country grows and when we have reason to just rethink the way we have conducted our governmental processes, I think we ought to do that. We need to learn how to handle tough discussions, and I think this is one of them. And I would love, for example, for Arkansas to be more prioritized, because folks are gobsmacked all over the world. They're just so surprised in other parts of the world. And I will add, right here in the United States, that when somebody has not got the majority of the vote, they haven't won the election. And pretty much it's an anathema to everything we have taught our kids about how you win an election. Because think about it, in elementary school, for example, we will have an election for the class president or whatever, and it's just a simple thing of a majority, and then they get confused as they go through our whole process. So I think it's okay to have a discussion about it.
A couple of points that your rival in the race brought up recently. He said step one for you, if elected, would be to vote for re-elect Speaker Pelosi, assuming the House remains in Democratic hands. One, would you, and two, do you think she has represented your party well as Speaker? Her values, her statements?
Well, I will point out before as he said that, he made sure everybody knew that as he indicated, I would be joining the Congressional Black Caucus. And I know that was nothing more than a dog whistle. Perhaps people haven't noticed that she is Black, which I found to be I was very disappointed by that because, you know, that was just really bringing dirty politics from Washington to Arkansas. And I am happy to say that I am happy about the number of people who have contacted me and just so disappointed in French Hill and saying, this is not the French Hill I thought I knew. And this is just race baiting. And so he just went from there to Nancy Pelosi in an effort to just stack all of these things that must be wrong with the Joyce Elliott that people know in this state. If he can't run on his record. So he has just reduced himself to an attack on me and an attack on my character. I have a record on which I can run. And for him to be speculating about what I'm going to do when I get there is just one more distraction, Steve. And to say things like, I'm as dangerous as they come. This Joyce Elliott is as dangerous as they come. She will join the Black Caucus. She will vote for Nancy Pelosi. I think that is French Hill's problem. He's the one that's letting that live in his head. That's not a problem for me.
Well, stripping away all of the rhetoric, left or right, should you be elected, well, back to the matter of Speaker Pelosi. Does she fairly represent your values? Does she accurately represent your values in terms of policy?
Well, she probably has some values that are different from mine, but when it comes to things such as, you know, whether or not people should have health care, whether or not we should have great education, whether or not people should have jobs, whether or not people should have an opportunity to be a part of the prosperity in this country. There are values that we share. There are probably some that we don't. But what I want us to understand is I'm not running to elect Nancy Pelosi. I am running to represent the people of this district. I will vote for the person with whom I can work the best to get things of this district. And that's all I'm after. I am not caught up in the person. I'm caught up in who can help me help District 2.
From the start of this presidential campaign, or this election cycle, Senator, there has been obvious pressure from many of the candidates to push your party to the left. Has it gone too far to the left in your estimation? And B, if you want to be more of a centrist, how can, if elected, how can you resist the pressure to go along to get along?
Well, one thing about the Democratic Party, people talk about the left, but maybe there's some pushing going on, but I don't see evidence that the party, all of the party itself has gone to the left. People know me right here in Arkansas as somebody who has a bipartisan record. I've worked with Governor Huckabee, Governor Hutchinson, Governor Beebe. These are the people who have been the governors in my tenure. I've worked with Republicans in the House and in the Senate. And as I always say, and I say this proudly, and I know it's the case, there's not a Republican in this state who will tell you I won't work with them in the legislature because they know I will. So wherever the party is, and I don't see it, you know, we have a few people who make the news a lot, and we are characterizing the whole party by the few people who make the news. But by and large, if you take a look at the class that was elected in the last class, you will find some very middle of the road people there, far more than the people who are the ones who make the news. And so I think there's room for balance, and that's the major thing I want to be. That's what I've always looked for. How do you balance it? It shouldn't be all of this or all of that. And that's why I think it's important to have two parties. It shouldn't be one party all the time. And the same thing is true within a party. It shouldn't be all of any one type of people or everybody thinking the same way.
Rarely have we seen public opinion, Senator, as divided, or the nation as divided as it is. The chasm just seems unbreachable. How would you, as a member of Congress, seek to resolve that?
You know, Steve, this is one of the things I feel so strongly that I have the capability of helping with, not just doing. Because I've practically been on a unity tour all my whole life, at least from age 15, when I was integrating a school. When at 15, I just saw things that were so horrific in terms of keeping us apart. And that's when I first began to realize how it was so built in that we were supposed to be apart. And from that led me to being a school teacher and taking a job. The very first job I took as a school teacher, out of lots of choices, I took a job at a school where there had never been a black teacher, because I thought I needed to be there for the black kids and the white kids, because I'd lived that life of seeing kids being torn apart by adults. So I worked all my life with patience, with learning about other people, trying to be a role model for people, what it means to appreciate others who are different from you, and understand how that's a very good thing, to understand and have friends who are different from you, and be empathetic and sympathetic about people. But the way I used to talk to my students about it is, there's a reason we're called the United States of America. We need to put more on that united. So I've been able to do this in my life, and I will not pretend it's not been difficult. It has been very difficult at times, but it's worth it. So I can't do it in Washington by myself, but I can certainly do the same kind of things I've done here in Arkansas, work with folks who are in all of the party, work with folks who are in the other party. This is just doable. I was able to be a part of 75 bipartisan bills that have been signed just by Governor Hutchinson. I don't buy into it's a lost cause in Washington. But the way I do think I can help is to find allies, because I don't think people are not happy with this in Washington. I don't think, for the most part. I'm talking about people who are serving there. But I'm willing to take leadership, and I'm saying, look, we've got to do some things away from talking about policy to grow relationships. Because if we grow relationships outside of when we are trying to put policy in place, that's how you begin to treat people better, respect people, respect their opinions, learn to collaborate them. Because once you know people, you work with people differently and you treat them differently. And you accept their ideas and their samenesses and their differences a whole lot better.
Senator, I got to end it there.
Okay.
I've got to end it there simply because we're out of time. Senator, we thank you for yours. Win, lose, or draw, come back soon. Always a pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you. And we'll be back in a moment. Our guest will be Representative Frenchill.
Support for Arkansas Week provided by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette, the Arkansas Times, and KUAR-FM 89.